It's here. After what feels like a minor eternity, Dusk has finally stepped out from the shadows of early access and emerged into the glorious light of full release. And I cannot tell you how happy I am to see this day, because Dusk has pretty much dominated my attention when it comes to the realm of retro-style FPS ever since I got my grubby mitts on episode 1 back in August of 2017. What excited me about Dusk was that it approached the realm of the retro-styled FPS with a degree of authenticity that I don't think I've seen in other releases as of yet, and the release of episode 2 only served to double my excitement for what this game was doing, so you can imagine how I was feeling about the imminent release of episode 3, but this is all me getting ahead of myself. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, because Icarus has got a review to do. So, for the benefit of all of you who are new to the Dusk party, what exactly is Dusk? Well, it's a retro-styled FPS taking heavy inspiration from the likes of Quake and putting you in the shoes of Dusk Dude. Or is it Dusk Guy? Or is it the Intruder? I don't know if everyone's settled on an official name to use yet, but anyway, you escape from a dank murder basement populated by chainsaw-wielding psychopaths and fireball-chucking cultists, and begin a mission of retaliation that takes you above, beneath, and somewhere beyond the cursed town of Dusk. Population 666. I mean, obviously. But that's pretty much all the setup you need. You are essentially now primed to enjoy Dusk, much as I was when episode 1 first broached early access. What I particularly enjoyed about this introduction was that Dusk spends precious little time pissing about. You've barely loaded into the first level before you're carving through that basement with a pair of rusty scythes and whatever else you can get your hands on. As far as a statement of intent goes, episode 1 had me sold as soon as I got my hands on the dual-wielded pump-action shotguns. Blasting away at cultists with those guns just felt so damn good. But that's not to pay any disservice to the pistols you acquire either, delivering a pretty satisfying crack with each shot that's only amplified when they too become available in dual-wielding format. Eventually, though, episode 1 also delivers onto you a pretty comprehensive look at the Dusk armory in general, which consists of the staple super shotgun, which delivers quite the requisite boom, a pretty dacatastic machine gun, a tremendously powerful hunting rifle, an oddly phallic energy crossbow, which, added bonus, can shoot through walls, the mortar, which can lob explosives that can be triggered manually later, and last but not least, the riveter, Dusk's analog to the good old-fashioned rocket launcher. You'd think that by allowing you to acquire all of the available weapons during the course of episode 1, Dusk may run the risk of having you get overly familiar with them and possibly rob later episodes of potential variety. As luck would have it, episode 2 suffers from no such problem, as it introduces you to a whole new suite of levels, which in turn come replete with its own new suite of enemies, some of which who were in fact teased towards the end of episode 1. Episode 2 effectively doubles down on the formula established in episode 1 of Dusk and starts to crank up that intensity, pitting you against larger and more potent combinations of enemies. Thankfully, they're all projectile-based, when not attempting to claw at your face, that is, meaning that you're free to engage in the kind of movement that Dusk does gloriously well, which is bunny hopping around like a lunatic and blasting them squarely in the face. That's not to say, though, that Dusk doesn't know when to vary that formula up. It isn't all encounters in wide open spaces. In fact, Dusk knows exactly when to draw those walls in, crank up the atmosphere, and give you a good old-fashioned spook, as evidenced here by another episode 2 enemy, the Wendigo. What is not evidenced here, however, is my girlish screaming at said Wendigo. One of the many things that I appreciate about Dusk is this ability of it to juggle tone throughout. Moments of sheer balls-to-the-walls mayhem set alongside moments of creeping through the dark with nothing but your flashlight to light the way, or not, as Dusk occasionally contrives, leaving you whimpering slightly in the dark of some infernal machine or a pitch-black basement, with nothing but an aforementioned Wendigo for company. As I already alluded to, Episode 2 really does crank everything up from that already great baseline in Episode 1, and this includes the action elements, the horror elements, and most certainly the level design, because good grief does Episode 2 contain some absolute corkers. Particular note has got to go to Escher Labs, which, if the name means anything to you, should clue you into the reality-bending nature of what that level's corridors have in store for you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention another level of note during Episode 2, which was that of the Erebus Reactor. If ever there was a perfect combination of music and level, I think this one would most certainly take the cake. It just propels you along, begging you to synchronize your movement and even your gunshots to the beat through that wide open, chaotic space. Speaking of the music though, Andrew Hulshult knocks it so far out of the park with his soundtrack for this game that I don't think the ball will ever come back down. All things considered though, it's safe to say that Episode 2 is a wonderful journey through an industrial hell, one that complements and effectively builds upon that back-a-beyond farmyard horror that defines the levels of the first. From here on in though, I'm going to be talking about my experience with Episode 3, so if you want to avoid spoilers for the final third of the game, then this is where I humbly advise you to skip to the time code on screen. Got it? Good. Episode 3 is where Dusk thoroughly immerses itself in the supernatural and strange, landing you in a sort of ruined nether realm where sword-wielding specters screech at you with the sound of scraping metal, hovering mounds of flesh ceaselessly vomit skulls in your general direction, and as yet unseen horrors queasily wheeze in the shadows of an unlit crypt. If Episode 2 involved a minor sprinkling of the spooks, Episode 3 is where Dusk stockpiles its spooks. It's an episode that alternates between unease and wonder as you make your way through its twisted levels and deal with its tortured inhabitants, but if there's one particular level that sticks in the mind here, it would be a level called Homecoming. Existing much further along the wonder side of the spectrum, Homecoming lands you on a floating series of islands seemingly torn into the sky from some unassuming suburb. It's an effortlessly evocative sight, and one that's made all the more impressive with the introduction of the gravity flipper. As you can probably tell, the gravity flipper changes the orientation of the entire level, inviting you to plunge headlong sideways, avoiding trees as you go on your way to the next part of the level where yet another gravity flipper will completely upend your sense of direction. It's gloriously inventive, and certainly echoes the likes of Episode 2's Escher Labs, inasmuch as it's this crazy idea for a level that just seems to come out of nowhere and completely grabs your attention. It's not a particularly difficult level, it doesn't require much combat as previous levels did, but I'll be damned if this one isn't one of the more memorable levels that I've played recently. Though not quite to such an extreme extent, the rest of Episode 3 similarly plays about with your sense of place and orientation, latter parts of the episode effectively returning you to reconfigured and corrupted versions of levels from previous episodes before landing you in probably my least favorite level in the episode, and that would be a level by the name of Dweller in the Darkness. Don't get me wrong, I understand the idea behind this level, a final test of worthiness before you get to face the big bad, but still, it just feels really bland in comparison to just how good everything else in this episode is. If you still feel a bit in the dark about what exactly is going on in this level, it's essentially Horde survival mode, even though Dusk already has that in its separate wave-based endless mode. It's just a level that feels a bit like a rogue pothole on an otherwise immaculate road. Wrapping everything up after that, however, is Episode 3's final level, entitled Dusk. If there is anything that conveys the idea that shit is about to get real, it's naming the level after the game itself. As it happens, it's also a level that finally gives a name to that ever-present voice that's been antagonizing you throughout the game, and as it turns out, it's just a dude. A dude called Jacob. who coincidentally also runs a cult. A dude who also has all the same weapons and movement abilities as you. And that's when you realize the previous level, which I disliked, was essentially giving you the hint to really work on your bunny hopping, because boy are you gonna need it here. Especially if you're playing it on the likes of Cero Miedo, Dusk's equivalent of hard. When it comes to the subject of bosses in Dusk, I describe them as an entertainingly mixed bag. Take for example the final bosses of episode 1, The Experiment, a flaming fireball spitting demon horse swiftly followed by Second Experiment, another flaming fireball spitting demon horse, but the real icing on the cake there is if you find a secret just by the exit, you can take on the ultimate challenge, Failed Experiment, a tiny flaming fireball spitting demon horse. I just find it endearing that for all of the dark subject matter that runs through Dusk, it still has this undercurrent of goofiness, the kind of thing that gives rise to bosses such as the Defender of Erebus, Big John. They may not be particularly tough adversaries, but at the very least, they're memorable, which I'm not so sure I can say for the final boss of episode 2, which is the Guardian. And for all I can tell, it's pretty much a T-Rex with a mortar launcher glued onto one of its arms, and it's just a bit naff. But anyway, this is where I welcome everyone else back to the non-spoiler zone and attempt to wrap this one up with a neat little bow. Dusk is fucking great. It really is. If you have ever felt that pang of nostalgia that yearns for the uncompromising FPS stylings of the mid-90s, Dusk is for you. If you've ever felt the need for an FPS that isn't afraid to kick you up the arse and test your skills, Dusk is for you. If you miss bunny hopping circles around your enemies at frankly ridiculous speeds while also landing that one perfect shot, Dusk is for you. And if you want a game that has a button dedicated to spinning your guns around for no good reason, not to mention a dedicated cigar button, Dusk is for you. Dusk, for me, is a warm, blood-soaked blanket of a game that effortlessly mines that rich seam of retro FPS goodness from back in the day and refines it into something that is absolutely rock solid to play. But let's face it, the formula was never broken to begin with. The combat here is meaty and satisfying, the movement is buttery smooth, the level design in some cases is quite frankly inspired, and the music, as I've already said, knocks it out the park. To be honest, if Dusk doesn't look like the kind of game you'll enjoy, well, I pity you. For the rest of us, Dusk is the gift that keeps on giving, because once you're done with the campaign, not only do you have Endless Mode, where you can refine your survival skills against increasing waves of enemies, but you also have Duskworld. Duskworld is the multiplayer arm of Dusk, and it's as much of a glorious throwback as the main game itself. Pick your avatar, be it cultist, welder, or cart dog, open up the server browser, find yourself a party, and get fragging. I don't think I can adequately overstate just how much I've missed this kind of multiplayer. There's no bells and whistles here, no incremental unlocks, no XP grind, just pure gameplay. Your skill versus someone else's. If you're wondering how the levels play, they've got a very classic feel to them. If you ever played classic Quake, then you'll feel very much at home here. You've even got a few levels adapted from the single-player campaign into a more Duskworld-friendly format here, particularly the likes of Erebus Reactor, which I could honestly bounce around all day, every day. So yeah, I'm thinking by this point, it should be fairly obvious that I emphatically recommend everyone and their dog play Dusk. Is good game. Is very, very, very good game. But there you go, those are my thoughts on the full release of Dusk. I apologize I didn't go into more detail on the likes of episode 1, but to be honest, I went over that so many times when it originally released that I feel like going over it again here felt a bit redundant, let's say. But in any case, I hope it gave you a good idea of what to expect from Dusk and maybe gave you some incentive to splash a little cash on it yourself. Looking forward to seeing you in Duskworld. Be prepared. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand to the channel, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to gain access to early editions of my videos before anyone else, if that's the case, you'll find a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any other games you'd like to see me review in future. It doesn't have to be current or imminent release. I'm thinking about maybe doing some retro reviews at some point. But in any case, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.